We must discover the nature of the great principles in which we exist and which exist in and through us. For until we discover the basic principle, we cannot advance any other form of knowledge adequately. For this point on, Lord Bacon then goes into a detailed description of the scientific achievements of the island of Ben Salem. And for this time, it is taught that his findings are most extraordinary, for it declares that in this great college, we have to face an entire system of life based upon continual researches into the nature of things to discover their reason and their purpose. And also, these reasons and these purposes can be directed to the security and improvement of man, so that in the end, man shall attain all good things that are possible to man. And Lord Bacon goes into a very detailed description of situations that are quite within our present thinking, or certainly did not belong to his day, especially when we consider that he is applying them to the Western Hemisphere. He tells us, for example, that there are in this great house of the 6 days' work, the house of Solomon, the wise king, schools or divisions set up for the study of all special and difficult subjects, that there are tunnels that have been dug into the earth so that man can understand the nature of things beneath him and below him in all of the works of nature and of life. And there are towers raised to the sky for the contemplation of the stars and the measuring of the winds and currents in the air. There are all kinds of laboratories for experimenting with medicines and with all kinds of contrivances and machines. There are houses of inventions where the most skillful of men labor to perfect all manner of device by which the common good shall be advanced. All these things are part of the natural and proper labor of Solomon's house. And in the mysterious appendix works, which was mentioned as being published about 1660, there is long ahead of any development that we know of bearing upon it a discovery or description of a method of transmitting messages by telegraphy. How it is possible to send impulses through the air which can read at a distance. Messages can be communicated because these impulses are of different lengths. So we have all kinds of strange knowledge implied in these things. And it was the advancement of these phases of the problem that undoubtedly inspired the foundation of the Royal Society. But we cannot stop here because Lord Bacon then proceeds to explain how these country of Ben Salem, though isolated so that other men cannot find it, and this great school, hidden by nature in the most distant part of the sea, although others are not aware of its existence, this school are sent under various pseudonyms or in secret or incognito its scholars and its students to every part of the world, and there are 12 who travel everywhere about the earth, gathering all the knowledge of men and bringing it back. And there are also others who are perfecting knowledge within the mysteries and confines of Solomon's house, do in secret go back and diffuse that knowledge in other lands without revealing where it comes from. So that this house of wisdom is a kind of a secret house raised in the world to each can go under certain conditions, but only under certain conditions. Now, in most of these utopias, these conditions are approximately the same. The individual must be shipwrecked, or he must be totally lost, or he must be on the verge of terrible disaster when there is no longer any hope of his being saved, as in the case of these sailing people who have no longer any provisions, were on the verge of death when they found these safe harbor. The implication of these is rather obvious. Solomon's house, or the mystery of the true knowledge, is not to be found except in extremity, in some terrible emergency in which the human being, despairing of survival, is in this very despair brought into contact with the elements of his own preservation. The general theme behind all utopias is that men will not turn to this kind of essential knowledge until they despair of survival by any other means. By nature, the individual is self centered, self purposed, that he will continue in his present courses as long as he can endure them. And it's only obvious when he recognizes the immediacy of an ultimate disaster that he prays earnestly and genuinely for salvation. And having thus addressed heaven, and having this way sincerely opened his heart, having asked, as the ancient American Indian did, that the elders of the true ones would show him the way, becoming thus humbled in his own spirit, then he discovers rising before him the blessed city of the utopias. This again suggests the journey of man in his quest of essential knowledge, that it is only in some terrible crisis that the individual will come face to face with his own inadequacy. And the apparent indication in all of these is that this utopia, this house of Solomon, is in some way always accessible to man. It is never more distant from man than himself. But it is not to be easily found that agents and messengers from it are constantly going forth, and also all the news of the world is brought to them, but they themselves are concealed in a certain sense. All the news of the world is brought to each one of us by our own sensory perceptions, and from sensory perceptions pass inwards to something within ourselves which is likewise concealed, and the nature of which we do not fully understand. If it is true that the human body is a living temple, it is also quite possible that man himself is this living college of the 6 days' work. That while this man is forever receiving insight, sending forth his messengers in search of knowledge everywhere, that these messengers travel, so to say, in secret, and are not generally known by the nations to which they come, but they bring back all knowledge. But the school itself, which is to use this knowledge, which is to gradually bring it together to this great mystery of causation, to solve the mystery of causes, this school is unseen, connected to the world perhaps only by these bridge of sensory perceptions. And consequently, we have the feeling perhaps that in prayer, in destitution, in great emergency, under tremendous difficulties, men suddenly ceasing to be worldly wise, turning from this particular cause that has always led civilization to destruction, becoming humble, becoming receptive to life from within, then enabled to make use of this great wisdom that lies within us. Actually, inside of man, the 7 days of creation exist. Within each one of us are the rounds and the ratio cycles which have preceded us. Man is the product himself of the 7 great creative cycles, and within his own nature, he has a record of all that is gone before. Within himself is a living history of this world. Within his own subconscious is the living experience of his own eternity. Somewhere submerged in him is the lost world of the past. We try desperately to restore civilization from rocks and ruins. Actually, the civilization is a subconscious part of our own natures.